At 3:12 a.m., satellite images confirmed what many analysts feared but few expected. A column of 87 North Korean tanks, shipped secretly into Russia and redeployed into the Donbass, crossed the border under the cover of night. The armored force moved steadily, headlights dimmed, guided by Russian artillery spotters and drones circling overhead. To the outside world, it looked like just another reinforcement effort, another attempt by Moscow to push deeper into eastern Ukraine. But what no one knew, not even the North Korean crews, was that they were driving straight into a trap that Ukraine had prepared for weeks. The tanks rolled in 3 tight columns, spaced carefully to protect against ambushes. Russian artillery units fired occasional shells ahead of the formation, clearing the path of obstacles. Surveillance drones swept the roadways, scanning for enemy movements. Everything about the march was disciplined, deliberate, and cautious. Yet from the perspective of the tank crews, the road ahead looked strangely quiet. Villages that normally showed faint lights were dark. Roads that once held signs of life were empty. Windows were boarded, barns abandoned, and fields silent. It felt less like advancing into contested territory and more like rolling through a ghost zone. By 3:18 a.m., the armored columns entered a narrow valley, farmland bordered by tree lines and small ridges. Russian commanders believed this path was safe, cleared earlier by reconnaissance. The tanks pressed forward, engines growling, treads grinding the frozen ground. To the crews, it felt almost too easy. Radios buzzed with confidence. They expected little resistance. What they didn't realize was that Ukraine had already mapped this ground, measured every turn, every choke point, every blind spot. For weeks, reconnaissance drones and special forces had studied the terrain. This valley wasn't empty. It was the kill zone. At 3:21 a.m., the lead column triggered the first line of buried mines. A deafening blast tore through the front tank, flipping it on its side. A second explosion followed, ripping apart an armored personnel carrier and scattering its crew across the road. Chaos erupted instantly. Tank crews panicked, radios crackled with frantic chatter, and the entire column halted as smoke filled the air. The path forward was blocked, and the way back was cut off. Within seconds, the valley that had looked silent now became a death trap. Ukraine had laid out mine corridors across the routes of advance, ensuring that once the first vehicle struck, retreat would be nearly impossible. Tanks tried to maneuver around the wreckage, only to hit secondary charges hidden beneath the soil. Fireballs erupted one after another, lighting up the night sky. The illusion of a safe advance was gone. And then came the silence, the pause before destruction. Ukrainian forces watching the battlefield had everything locked in place. Coordinates were preset. Drones were already in the air, circling above, marking every target with infrared beams. Artillery crews sat quietly at the edge of the fight, fingers on triggers, waiting for the single order that would unleash the storm. The tanks, stalled and burning in the middle of the valley, had nowhere to go. At 3:27 a.m., the Ukrainian commander gave the single order his troops had been waiting for: full fire. Within seconds, the night exploded. Artillery batteries that had remained silent until now opened up with devastating accuracy. The first barrage of shells slammed directly into the stalled tank columns, tearing through armored hulls and supply vehicles. The valley lit up with flashes of orange and white as explosions echoed across the fields. From the ridgelines, HIMARS rockets streaked into the sky, each one guided by pre-programmed GPS coordinates. They rained down with surgical precision, striking command vehicles and ammunition carriers at the heart of the formation. Supply trucks loaded with fuel erupted in massive fireballs, sending shockwaves through the valley. Entire sections of the column were engulfed in flames within minutes. Tank crews tried desperately to reverse, to break formation, but the roads were blocked with burning wrecks. Overhead, drones hovered silently, their cameras feeding live coordinates to Ukrainian gunners. Some circled high, marking targets with infrared beams, while others flew lower, releasing small precision munitions onto exposed armor. Every movement, every attempt to maneuver was tracked and punished. Tanks that tried to turn onto side roads found themselves trapped again as artillery adjusted instantly. It was a coordinated strike designed not just to damage, but to annihilate. By 3:30 a.m., the valley had turned into an inferno of fire and steel. Columns that once moved confidently now sat in ruins, smoke billowing upward as more shells crashed down. Ukrainian units rotated their fire to keep pressure constant, one battery firing, another reloading, a third preparing rockets. The entire trap had been rehearsed, coordinated down to the minute. The tanks, once symbols of strength, were now silhouettes glowing in the flames. The air filled with chaos. Explosions deafened crews still alive inside their vehicles. Some attempted to bail out, only to be cut down by shrapnel or drone strikes. Radios buzzed with desperate calls for support, but Russian artillery could not respond effectively. Every time they attempted to provide covering fire, counter-battery radars located their positions, and Ukrainian guns answered back. At 3:32 a.m., air support arrives. Ukrainian Bayraktar drones joined the assault, swooping low to drop laser-guided bombs onto tanks that still tried to move. Engines burst into flames, turrets flew off, and armored hulls cracked open. Russian short-range air defense systems scrambled to respond, launching missiles into the sky, but electronic jamming blinded them. Targets were missed, missiles flew wide, and the drones continued their attack unchallenged. By now, the tank crews realized the scale of the trap. The kill zone wasn't random, it was deliberate, calculated, and inescapable. The narrow valley, the silent ridges, the abandoned villages, everything had been prepared to funnel them into this slaughterhouse. The once proud column of 87 North Korean tanks was being dismantled piece by piece, and every minute brought more destruction. At 3:35 a.m., Ukrainian artillery shifted fire again, this time sealing the exits of the valley. Shells pounded the rear of the column, blocking retreat, while additional batteries focused on the front, cutting off any chance of breaking through. The tanks were trapped inside a box of fire, with artillery on every side and drones circling above. The commanders on the ground had little control left. Some tanks tried to push through the wreckage, engines roaring, tracks grinding forward over burning debris. But each attempt was met with precise fire, a missile slamming into the engine deck, or a shell exploding directly on top. Crews that had survived the initial ambush were running out of options. Fuel was burning, ammunition was cooking off inside vehicles, and morale was collapsing. By 3:40 a.m., the once powerful armored column had become a graveyard of wrecks, glowing in the night. The Ukrainian trap was tightening, but the battle was far from over. The survivors were desperate, and a counterattack was already forming. By 3:42 a.m., the valley was burning, but not all of the 87 tanks were gone. Dozens of vehicles still had operational engines, and their commanders gave one last order: form a breakout line. Surviving tanks pushed forward, guns firing wildly into the ridges, hoping to blast open a path. Engines roared, treads crushed wreckage beneath them, and turrets fired into the darkness. To the crews, there was no choice left: stay still and burn, or fight their way out. The counterattack began with a surge. A cluster of tanks tried to push through the front, shells pounding into the ridgeline where Ukrainian artillery observers were hidden. Others swung their guns toward the tree lines, spraying the area with machine gun fire to suppress possible ambushes. Smoke rounds were fired to cover their movement, creating a thick haze across the valley floor. Under the smoke, the tanks advanced, determined to smash through. But Ukraine had prepared for this moment too. Hidden along the tree lines, small anti-tank teams had been waiting silently. Equipped with javelins, NLAWs, and Stugna P launchers, they held their fire until the tanks were deep into their sights. When the survivors tried to break out, the valley lit up again, this time from shoulder-fired missiles streaking across the fields. One javelin locked onto a moving tank, striking it from above and igniting its ammunition. A second NLAW fired from close range, tearing open another vehicle in a ball of flame. Within minutes, the counterattack stalled. The survivors fired back desperately, their guns blasting into empty tree lines, but they couldn't hit what they couldn't see. Ukrainian infantry worked in pairs, shifting positions after every launch, striking from new angles. Every time a tank tried to maneuver, a fresh missile slammed into its side. Engines blew apart, turrets were ripped from hulls, and burning wrecks piled on top of each other. At 3:47 a.m., the kill zone tightens. Ukrainian artillery rejoined the fight, pounding the exits of the valley again. Barrages sealed off every escape route, cratering the roads and collapsing bridges. Drones hovered above, laser marking the remaining armor for precision strikes. Bayraktar drones swooped in again, releasing small bombs onto tanks stuck in the mud or blocked behind wreckage. Every attempt to escape was cut short with ruthless efficiency. Radio chatter from the trapped formation grew frantic. Some crews begged for artillery support, others called for air cover, but Russian coordination had broken down. Jamming cut communications, and counter-battery fire silenced artillery that tried to respond. The North Korean crews, many of whom had never fought in this kind of environment, were isolated and overwhelmed. By 3:50 a.m., the counterattack collapsed. The tanks that had surged forward were gone, burning wrecks scattered across the valley floor. Survivors abandoned vehicles, running toward the ridges on foot, only to be met by drone surveillance and Ukrainian infantry advancing behind the bombardment. Some crews tried to hide in ditches or barns, but Ukrainian forces pushed steadily forward, sweeping the area with fire and capturing those who surrendered. The kill zone was complete. The valley that had once held 87 tanks was now a battlefield littered with destroyed armor, smoking craters, and the remains of a failed counterattack. Ukrainian forces had not only stopped the assault, they had crushed it entirely. But the trap was not finished tightening. The final blow was about to fall, and by dawn, nothing of the armored force would remain intact. By 4:10 a.m., the sounds of battle had shifted. The violent crack of artillery and the thunder of missiles slowed, replaced by the hiss of fires burning across the valley. The once disciplined armored column of 87 North Korean tanks was gone. More than 60 vehicles lay destroyed or abandoned, their twisted hulks glowing in the dim night. Turrets were blown clear of their chassis, black smoke poured into the sky, and the scorched earth was littered with wreckage. The survivors, those who hadn't been killed in their machines, had scattered in chaos. Some fled into the tree lines, some surrendered, and others ran back toward Russian positions with no vehicles left to fight in. Ukrainian artillery struck again, this time deliberately targeting both ends of the valley to collapse the final escape routes. Craters pockmarked the exits, while drones swept in to finish off vehicles still burning but not yet destroyed. Any tanks that still had working engines were struck again until they were immobilized. Ukrainian infantry advanced cautiously, clearing the battlefield sector by sector. Small arms fire rang out as soldiers encountered stragglers hiding near barns or ditches. Dozens were captured, weapons tossed aside in surrender. The entire battlefield was now under Ukrainian control. By 4:30 a.m., drone footage confirmed the destruction. The once formidable armored brigade was nothing but wreckage. Over 60 tanks were confirmed destroyed, another 15 disabled and abandoned, and the rest scattered beyond recovery. Ukrainian engineers moved in quickly, checking for survivors and securing captured vehicles. Russian attempts to send reinforcements failed. Artillery blocked the approach routes, and counter-battery fire silenced Russian guns. The battlefield belonged to Ukraine. As dawn broke over the horizon, the full scale of the ambush became clear. The valley floor was a graveyard of steel. Smoke rose from burning fuel, black columns marking where tanks had died. The silence was broken only by the crackle of fires and the rumble of Ukrainian recovery vehicles moving in. Soldiers walked past shattered hulks, stepping carefully around unexploded ordnance and smoldering wreckage. The kill zone had worked exactly as intended, a textbook ambush, executed with precision. By morning, Ukraine officially announced the destruction of the North Korean armored force. Commanders confirmed that the entire formation had been erased within hours. Satellite images supported the claim, showing the valley filled with burning wrecks. Videos captured by drones and released online spread rapidly across the world, showing explosions lighting up the night and tanks destroyed one after another. The footage sent a shockwave through both Moscow and Pyongyang. For Ukraine, this wasn't just a battlefield win, it was a political and psychological strike. The message was clear. Foreign reinforcements, no matter how many or how heavily armored, would meet the same fate. Ukraine had shown it could turn an enemy's strength into weakness by planning, patience, and precision. For Russia, the loss was humiliating. For North Korea, it was a warning that sending hardware or crews into the war would carry devastating consequences. By 6 a.m., the battlefield was declared sealed. Ukrainian troops finished clearing the valley, setting demolition charges on tanks that could not be recovered. The entire area was locked down, denying Russian forces any chance of salvaging equipment. The scale of the destruction was undeniable. An entire armored force eliminated in one night. The message echoed beyond the battlefield. Ukraine had not just stopped an armored advance, it had erased it. To Moscow and Pyongyang, the signal was unmistakable. Try once, and there won't be a second time.